Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and get started for a minute, and people will trickle in. My name is Brian Lewis. I'm a front-end engineer. Have a seat, whatever you want. At 4 Kitchens. Before that, I did site building, development, and training, and all that stuff at Mongols Unraveled, and I host that podcast. I still kind of do that, but since I started working at 4 Kitchens, there's a lot less of it. So. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Drupal, building Drupal 8 sites with Composer and configuration management. Originally, this talk was like a whole, here's how to site build in Drupal 8, and it covered all kinds of stuff. I had to cut out like half of it because it would be like a 4-hour presentation or something. And so I guess that would make it 2 hour. I had to cut out a lot. But basically, well, let's just get started. Here's what we'll kind of cover. Mostly, it's going to be using Composer to build a site locally as well as on production, and the differences in how you do that, and then using configuration management to develop locally, and then push your changes up to production so they can mirror what you've done locally. Things you'll have to have if you want to do this are Composer and Git. Drush will be installed as a part of this, but having it installed globally will make your life easier. So Composer, get that, get that, and Drush, go ahead and get that. So what we're going to do first is we're going to install Drupal 8 with the Drupal-composer/Drupal-project. Has anybody used that or heard of it or seen it or know what I'm talking about? You can raise your hands so I know. Okay, so a little over half of you. Basically, it's a project on GitHub that has a lot of scaffolding already built out and things ready for a Composer-based workflow for Drupal 8. And 7, actually, but we're just going to talk about 8. However, I've updated this whole session to use the Drupal.org Composer endpoints now instead of the Drupal packages endpoints, which everybody has been using. If you've used it so far, you've been using that. The official Drupal.org endpoints are in beta, and it's at packages.drupal.org/8 or Drupal 8. The target launch date is January, and when that happens, the Drupal packages repo is going to be no more. They've already said once Drupal.org's got it, we're shutting this down. So this will actually show you how to use the new one that's in beta, but works with only a couple little issues at this time. So in order to do that, the Drupal Composer Drupal project hasn't been updated to use the new one yet. So basically, we're going to slightly modify the way we install it, and then set our packages to use the Drupal.org one, and then install from there. Sorry. No problem. So here's what that looks like. If you've done this so far, the Composer create project command all looks familiar to you. Oh, and by the way, everything I'm doing is going to be in command line. I did this in New Orleans as well, and like basically everybody said, we don't want to see the interface, just show us how to do it in the command line. And so I said, oh, okay. And so that also cut out a bunch of stuff. It should all be pretty easy. If you have any questions at any time, please stop me and ask. So we use the Composer create project command, and the special thing in here is the --no install. That basically says don't actually install anything yet, because first I want to change to use the Drupal.org packages repository instead of the Drupal Composer or the Drupal packages repository. So no install prevents that. Yes.
Just to confirm, your starting folder is sessions, and then the actual command line is Composer.
Yeah, sessions is just where I am. I'm actually creating a project into the folder DrupalCorn 2016. So that's where my project will actually live, is in the DrupalCorn 2016 folder. So when that's done, it created the project, and I move into it, and now we're inside the project folder. So in here, we're using Composer config command that basically just says replace the Drupal packages repository with the Drupal.org repository. That's all it does. You can do it by hand if you want, or you can just copy and paste. And then you clear the Composer cache and run Composer update, and this will actually go through the install process. And at the end, we have Drupal built into that folder directory.
Do you already have Composer installed globally?
Yes. Yeah, you have to have Composer and Git installed kind of on your machine first, and then go from there. So then we're gonna do some basic setup stuff. This isn't necessarily Drupal specific, so I'm gonna kind of blow through this, but basically I'm developing on MAMP locally, so I'm gonna add a site to my host file, create a virtual host entry, create a database, and create a Drush alias file. And that last one is super important. Raise your hand if you've never used a Drush alias file before.
Well, I've never made one.
That's okay, that's fine. If you use like Pantheon, you can probably download it theirs or something. But so it's pretty straightforward. I edit the host file, and I've added it down here for my local host 127.0.0.1 loc.drupalcorn2016.com, and I add the virtual host. I always use xip.io as a server alias. If you haven't used that before, look it up. It's a little bit outside of this talk, but basically it lets you access a site that you're developing on your local machine, like on your phone, as long as you're on the same local network or a tablet or anything, so you can actually access that local site from other devices, physical devices. It's pretty sweet. Okay, create the database, UTF-8 general CI, and this is the alias file. This is basically as simple as it gets, and that's all we need for developing locally. There are a couple things to point out. It goes into your user directory, so I'm putting it into Tilde, my home directory, /.drush, and then the file is like a site short name, aliases.drushrc.php. This site name is very important, and what you put in the say aliases key here, in my case I did loc, that's also important. The rest of it just says, here's the URI, and here's where my actual Drupal installation is. That's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward. So remember, dcorn and loc. So we'll see those in just a minute. And then I'm going to use Drupal console to install it and Drush to log in. So I move into the web directory, because if you haven't used the Drupal packages thing, you've got the project directory, and then inside that is actually the web directory, so you can kind of have two levels. And I've broken this command out into multiple lines so that it's not just one tiny string of lines, but you would type it all out as one thing. And I'm passing everything I could possibly do into it. If you don't pass some of these, when you hit enter, it'll ask you to fill them in. So if you just did like Drupal site install standard site name, it'll ask you for what type of database, the port, user, all that stuff as you go. So I do that, and it did actually ask me for the database prefix, but I didn't want anything, so I hit enter, and then Drupal is installed. That's how you install Drupal with Drupal console. It's pretty awesome, right? It's literally a command, and you have Drupal. And then here's the alias. So that Drush alias that I created, dcorn, was from the file name, and then the loc was the site key that I gave it, or the alias key. So if you had multiple aliases in there, you could have loc, staging, production, all in that same file, and you just reference them at dcorn.staging or at dcorn.production or whatever in that alias file. And the site set command, or I'm using the Drush use alias, this says, from now on, I want to use Drush as though I am in that site. So no matter where I am on my system, even if I'm in another project's web directory, if I run Drush CR or whatever, it's going to run it as though I'm in this site. It's going to run it for that site. The reason that's important with this setup is, you're going to run your composer commands from the project root, but you would have to run Drush commands from the web root. So you'd be constantly doing this dance of move into the web directory, run Drush, move back out, run composer, move in, run Drush. Anyways, if you do this, that lets you just stay in that project root. You can run your composer commands and Drush commands at the same place. You don't have to move to do that. And then the Drush ULI command is a user login command. Basically, type that, and you're taken to the one-time password reset for the admin user of your site. Any questions so far? Yes?
Yeah, is everything so far the same for 7.8?
Possibly, but I never used Composer on 7. So
That can work.
you can, but it's
a mess.
yeah. I wouldn't do it.
It's a technical yes and a practical no.
Yeah.
Saving the time.
Yeah. So you technically can use Composer for Drupal 7, but I wouldn't. And if you're going to build new sites, do it on 8 because it's good now. So. Yeah.
Use Drush Make on 7. That's your most consistent, less hair-pulling option.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you've been using Drush Make in Drupal 7, stop and use Composer in Drupal 8. It's kind of replaced Drush Make. You can still, again, technically use Drush Make for Drupal 8, but don't. Cool. So is everybody following so far? We've used Composer to create the project, we've used Console to install the project, and then we use Drush to log into our site. If I were to break it down to its most simplistic terms, there's like 3 commands to get into our site. And I just click login, and it uses the stuff that I filled out when I did the site install, and I can just change that to whatever I want. And we're good. Okay, now we're going to talk about the settings file. The reason we're going to talk about the settings.php and creating a settings local.php is because of configuration management. Raise your hand if you've not used configuration management yet with Drupal 8. Not used it. Okay, so just to kind of explain, basically you're going to run a command that takes your current site, it's called drush export, or drush config export, or CEX. I'm not going to call it sex, that's just weird. But yeah, drush config export, and it's going to look at all of the things that make your site, minus content. So just the configuration, and export all that to files that you can then move to another site, and import it, and have an exact duplicate of the first site on the second. And the settings.local file is useful because let's say you want caching to be enabled on production all the time, no matter what. You can save that setting to the configuration, push that up, but then locally you'd have to turn it off and then do your stuff, like if you're theming, you don't want caching on. But then if you just export, all of a sudden now theming's off on production because you saved that configuration. So using a settings.local file lets you say, let's say the configuration that says it should be cached to the configuration, but then locally I'm just going to add a little thing that says, actually don't cache it in this instance. And so it's never saved to configuration, it's just something that happens. So you'll always be cached on production and never be cached on development. It's pretty awesome. Now, if you've opened up a settings.php file before, you will know that it's about 700 and something lines long. I typically get rid of all of the comments and things I'm not using, and this is what I'm left with, 40 lines, as opposed to 740 or something. And if you ever need to know what something does, or need a new thing, just go to your default.settings.php, it's all there. So you're not losing anything by doing this. And so you'll also notice this grayed out section here, still commented out, is the load local development override configuration if available. This is what basically says, if there's a settings.local.php file right next to this one, go ahead and load everything that's in there as well. What this means is that we can have the database credentials for each site in its own settings.local.php file and have just the settings that are common to all sites in the settings.php. And that's especially useful for like the database. It also says keep it at the bottom because if I were to leave it here, put my local database credentials, for example, in here, but then my production database credentials are in the settings.php, it would read the local ones and then keep going to this file and then read those, and all of a sudden my site doesn't work because what came later has overridden what was supposed to be overriding the overridden overrides. Oh yeah? Okay, cool. And this is actually built into Drupal 8, and I think they backported to Drupal 7. So like if there's this thing in your settings.php that says use this file, basically. So I've just moved it down to the bottom here.
Go back to the
yes?
settings local PHP file again for just a second.
I don't think I've created a settings local yet.
Oh.
Yeah, this is all just the settings.php file right now. This is still but this thing down here says if there's a local, look for it.
Yeah.
We're going to create that in just a minute.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. And because I'm using MAMP, you need to add this Unix socket line to your database credentials, otherwise you can't use Drush and things like that. So add it, and then you're done. Another good reason to put the settings, the database stuff in a local file, because if I were to push this up to production, I don't have MAMP on production, so it's gonna yell at me. Cool. So here's actually creating the settings.php file, or settings.local.php. I move it into my sites directory, and first off, one of the things that the project we're building all this off of does is tightens up security on folders and stuff. So the default directory is using a 555, basically no write access for anybody to that. So I have to open that up first. chmod 777 says anybody can write to it. I'm using the touch command just to create an empty settings.local.php file in the default directory, and then I'm putting security back up so that security, because of security. And then I'm showing them it is back. So that's all there is to it. So now the settings.local.php file is empty. I have basically copied my database stuff and moved it over there. And because this is saying if this exists, read it, it'll read it. I can refresh the site, everything works. Nothing's changed. I've just moved where that information is being stored. Is that clear? As mud? Glass? Okay. Okay, then we're going to use Git to go ahead and initialize a repository. Raise your hand if you've not used Git. Good. Okay, I'll go through this. I'm going to modify the .gitignore file because we don't want that settings.local.php file to be pushed up because then it would start storing that. So we want to say basically also ignore the settings.local.php file. Previous versions of Drupal had a line in their gitignore to ignore the settings.php file. Now we want the settings.php file in there because that's stuff that should be consistent across all of them. We just don't want to commit the settings.local.php file. So you'll notice that the settings.php isn't there. That's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to add that, and you can see this list is not cut off. That is the entire Git repository because of Composer. There's no core, there's no contributed modules, there's no anything. Literally, that is my entire repository. So that's what's being pushed to Git and pulled when I do a Git pull. The composer.json file is what contains all the information of these are the modules that should be downloaded. This is the version of Drupal that should be downloaded, all that stuff. I can just push this up there and then run a command, and it'll build out everything on that site. So Git repos, super small now. That's awesome. Commit that, and we're good. Then I'm just going to add it to, or add a remote repo for GitHub and push it up. This is all pretty straightforward stuff. So I want to take a break. Right now, this is what we've done. We've downloaded Drupal using Composer, installed it using console, set up our settings and local settings files, and then pushed everything up to the repo. Basically, this is the one-time stuff that you did at the beginning of a project. From now on, we're going to be going over things that you do on a recurring basis of site building or whatever. That's kind of just do this once, and then you can not have to think about it anymore. So let's go on to Composer. Composer is super, super fantastic. Raise your hand if you don't know what Composer is or what it does for you. Just heard the name. Everybody knows Dependency Manager. Okay, cool. Composer is awesome. So we're going to use it to install packages like modules and uninstalling packages. We're also going to talk about versions for packages because that can get a little hairy. We're going to force dev. We're going to upgrade and downgrade. We're going to try to skip versions, use version ranges, and then we're going to use Drush to enable some modules. And at the very end, I have a little slide that is significantly simplified from using the Drupal packages versions. Yeah, we'll get there. Okay, so if you go to the official documentation at drupal.org/node/2718229, you'll see they say, type this, composer required Drupal/pathauto. That's pretty easy, right? It works mostly. And I'll show you why in a second. If I run that, you'll see that pathauto, here we go, installing Drupal pathauto works. It also gets ctools and tokens, those dependencies. The thing I don't like about doing this way is that it gets the dev version of pathauto, but not always.
Isn't that because in your back, like 10 screens, you had minimum stability dev?
Minimum dev, but if you look at the page, it has an alpha 3 that's not dev. And I'd rather work with the quote-unquote stable release. So if I want alpha 3, it didn't give me alpha 3, it gave me dev. So how do I get alpha 3? Well, you have to pass the version. Also, it says you don't need the quotes, and while technically true, some shells won't work without the quotes. So just use quotes, and you'll always be good. So what we're going to do is composer require Drupal/pathauto : a version number. In this case, we're doing caret 1.0, which basically means semantically always at least version 1.0. And I'll talk about why I say semantically in just a minute too. So when I do that, you'll see that it's updated path auto from the dev to 1.0.0-alpha 3. So that's actually the version I want. So always use a version. Yeah. And now uninstalling packages is just as simple as composer remove Drupal/path auto. You don't have to pass a version because you're only going to have one installed. With that done, deletes it. Also deletes ctools and token because those are no longer required by any of the packages in my composer.json file. And I do briefly want to mention you should uninstall a module through either the UI or Drush before you remove it. Because if you don't, then when you try and do a config import, it's going to yell at you and say, I don't have the module. I have configs saved, but I don't have the module. I can't import configuration. And you'll be like, well, I can't. Oh, there's a little line. Oh, I have to install the module again first and then disable it, and then I can, yeah. I'll get to some slides that show that too. It's kind of annoying. Always disable before you compose or remove. So now with the admin toolbar module, if you don't specify a version, it acts a little different. It actually uses version caret 1.15, so at least version 1.15. And so that's actually the one that gets installed if I don't specify a version. You can see in my composer.json file here, it's actually specifying that version, and on the site, whoops, version 1.15 was installed. So if you do actually want the dev, then you can pass the version 1.x-dev or 2.x-dev or whatever, and that way you know you're getting dev. So always specify a version. If you want dev, tell it I want dev. If you don't want dev, tell it I don't want dev. Just be specific or explicit, and you'll always get what you want and not have to wonder, am I going to get dev this time? Am I going to get a version this time? What do I know? Yeah. Okay, so upgrading and downgrading projects. We actually just did this a minute ago, but I want to kind of explicitly show you how to upgrade or downgrade. Let's see. So I'm just installing admin toolbar real quick to get the 1.16 release so we can downgrade. The reason you might want to do this is if there's a breaking change in 1.16 or it conflicts with some custom code or something like that, you want to downgrade. Currently, if you just do this, or even if you use the caret 1.13, you still get 1.16 as soon as it's released because that's the latest. So what you'll do is just simply compose require and specify a version. So in this case, admin toolbar 1.14, we want that one for sure. And then you can see down here updating Drupal/admin_toolbar from 1.16 to 1.14. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I just wanted to, if you're like wondering, how do I downgrade? Just tell it this is what I want. There's not like an upgrade or rollback or anything, just tell it. And you can see in the composer.json, that's updated. So, let's talk about skipping versions. Say there's a breaking change in 1.15, but it's going to be fixed in 1.16. You can say, or I'm sorry, in this case I'm saying there's a breaking change in 1.16. You can use the not equal to's sign to say at least 1.14, but just not 1.16. So as soon as 1.17 comes out, it'll start installing 7 and keep going past that, if you know that the fix is in that. And I kind of show how that works here. When I run that, I get 1.15 because it's greater than 1.14, but not 1.16. 1.6 is the latest. And then just to further clarify that, I went back and said, let's do this without 1.15. In this case, 1.16 gets released because it matches that pattern. It's greater than 1.14, but not 1.15. Now, don't do this. Like if you know there's a breaking change and it's going to keep coming out, don't like just keep adding, but not this one, also not this one, also not this one, also not this one. You can use different version patterns. You can just say less than equal to 1.14, which in this case isn't a huge deal. But you can use the OR operator, so the double vertical pipe. You could say less than 1.14 or at least 1.16. And you can put that out as far as you go. So like if you know it's going to be fixed 3 versions from now, but it's not ready yet, you can go ahead and throw that in. Or if you think it might be fixed in 1.6, not sure, let's go ahead and install it. Oh, it didn't work. Then we have to just change that to 1.7 or something. Cool. So ORs, oh, and I should specify, this is OR, and is either a space or a comma. You can use either one. So if you just put like 1.14 and then space 1.16, we consider and. In this case, that wouldn't work because it can't be less than and greater than. But, but you could do the opposite. You could say greater than 1.14 and less than 1.16 or something like that to restrict. But ORs are double pipes. And you still have to enable modules with Drush. Composer itself has nothing to do with Drupal. It's just a dependency manager. So we can enable the modules with Drush the same way we always have, Drush en, and then your modules. So this is a table that I think had about 8 lines when I did this in New Orleans because I was using the Drupal packages versions and they were very different. It's been simplified to 3 with the Drupal.org packages repo. Basically, you can say latest stable is greater than 1.0, which is the caret 1.0. If you want the dev, specify dev or an exact version, put the version. I mean, that's really all you need to know. Yes?
It's a really question. Can you tell me about, can you talk about what the Tilde sign does?
Yes, I can. Let's talk about upper limits. That would be the tilde sign versus the caret. Almost the same, but not quite. So you'll notice in your require section, some of these have the carets and some of them have the tildes. And what's the deal with that? It's all about how high can the version increment. So tilde 1.0 and caret 1.0 are going to be the same thing every time. However, tilde 1.0.0 and caret 1.0.0 will not, because the caret respects semantic versioning, whereas the tilde will only allow the last digit specified to increment. So, oh, I just said that. Yep. So, for example, tilde 10 can go up to 19 because the last digit is a 0, so that one can increment as much as we want. It can go 99, 100, 5 million, whatever. Same thing with this. The caret says anything after the major number can increment. So in this case, the same thing. But down here, the tilde, only this third number can increment. So we'll only ever get 1.0.5 million or however high it wants to go. With the caret though, anything after the major version number can increment. So it could go up to 1.765.3,427 or whatever. Does that make sense?
What if you had a module you were comfortable with letting it go to 2 point whatever?
I would never recommend that, but
Just leave it alone and it just installs the latest.
I'm not sure.
That's it.
I've never wanted to do that.
Just an asterisk and require stable.
Tilde 1.0 or Tilde 2.0?
Maybe, I'm not sure, to be honest. So I'm not going to try and guess.
Somebody try it. We can test this.
Yeah.
Typically, the
And,
versions of modules are not stable different releases.
Right. Yeah. Typically, if that first number changes, it means something could very well break what you're doing. So that's not a good idea just to have it randomly upgrade and you didn't explicitly tell it, okay, now we're ready to go to the next version. Yeah. And so right now with Drupal, we only have major and minor numbers. We're not using semantic versions on Drupal modules and things yet. So technically you could use either one right now. However, we're trying to get to semantic versioning. So if you just start using that caret, you'll be good when that does happen. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Does anyone want to leave because they realize they don't actually want to be here?
Okay.
Okay.
So a couple slides back, you had you used Composer to update modules. You use Drush to enable them, but if you skip the first step and you say Drush en-y,
Yeah.
how
So
do you unsnarl that, or is that even a problem?
yeah. I have like 8 different answers I'm ready to give you.
I'll take them all.
Basically, don't do it, but granted that it might accidentally happen.
So assume in a non-perfect world it just did.
Yeah, so if you just type Drush in admin toolbar, admin toolbar tools, and you hadn't required a composer,
Yeah.
Drush is going to go ahead and download them to the thing. However, if what slide am I on? 62, okay. If I go back to my getignore file, there we go. You'll notice that modules contrib is ignored, so it won't be pushed up.
Right.
because that module will never be committed to the repository.
Right. But then the next guy that pulls down my repo doesn't get it.
Correct. He doesn't have it. So if you do that, just add it to your composer file
And
and
the easiest way.
everything will be fine. I don't think you need to uninstall it first. Just do a composer require, and it'll say nothing to update. It's already there.
Okay.
So
But it'll add it to the composer document.
right, but it'll add it to the composer JSON so that the next guy will get it.
What
Yeah.
was that
You
command?
just manually add that?
The composer require command, or
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Or you can just manually add it to the composer.json file,
you can.
but.
I don't like to do that. Somebody asked me that before. Let me get back to where I was. I think I was at 62. Yeah, we were here. No, we talked about this already. Okay. What was the question?
So you're just manually adding it to the composer.json.
Right. Somebody asked me about that. If you manually add a module to your composer.json file, and the last time I did this talk, I showed how to do that. I decided not to show it anymore because it gets real hairy because you can add it there, but then it's not in your project until you run composer update for it to get it placed into the composer.log file. And if you just run composer update, then everything gets updated.
Yes.
You can say composer update Drupal/pathauto, and then it will only update that thing.
Or you
But
could just do composer require and call it a day.
Yeah, or you can just say composer require and be done. Not have to remember to update everything on accident, or you know, yeah. So I wouldn't update the composer JSON file manually, just because it adds more possible points of failure. Cool. So that's composer and installing things. Let's talk about configuration management. First, we're going to set our config directory. We're going to export some configuration locally. We're going to use Git to push that up. And then we're going to we're going to basically use an install profile to make installation on production easier. So the first thing is when you install Drupal, it's going to create this sites default files config _ random hash / sync folder. That's where all your config files will be stored. Two problems with that. One, the files directory is technically web accessible. They've added the hash to make it highly unlikely for anybody to get your configuration files, but it's still technically web accessible, so anybody could if they were to be able to get that hash, right? But the more important thing is that our files directory is not in our Git repository. So there's no way to easily push this up. We'd have to do like through the interface download of our config archive and then manually through the interface on production import it. And, let's use Git. It's like 5 million times faster. So I'm going to change that in my settings.php from this random long thingy to my config directory is sync equals .. /config/sync. So the .. puts it outside the web root, but still in our project root. Because remember, we've got those two levels. We've got the project, and then the web directory is a folder inside there. And this is still in our Git repository, so it can be committed. And then when we do a push, all the config will be pushed up with our repository, and then we can import from other sites or other instances. Yes?
So why don't you put like default, put it in config default sync? Considering Drupal has now gotten onto this whole meta of every single site, regardless of you having more than one multi-site, is a multi-site. And so, for example, the site that I'm currently working on, we will be making it a multi-site. So I put mine in config default sync so that I know that this configuration for this specific site is in the default directory, and then each site beyond that is going to get its own configuration.
You can do that, and there are partial imports of config now. I haven't had to use that on any of my projects so far. Everything that I needed to do that would be a partial import candidate, I just override in the settings.php, and it's simpler and easier and less error prone. I've not tried to do a multi-site with this, so good luck. But you can call that file whatever you want. The point is the .. takes it outside of our web root, so it's no longer web accessible, but it still keeps it in our Git repository so we can move it around easily. And then I'm going to remove that file. I don't actually want that folder in my directory. It's just clean up. So the config export command is drush config-export, or the shortcut is drush cex, and the import is cim. So export, import, ex, im, pretty easy. And you can see when I run that, it was successfully exported to /config.sync. So now in my directory, I probably should show this at the beginning. This is my project root, and this is my web root. So Drupal actually lives inside of here. And that's where Drupal core, that's where the modules are, that's what my sites directory, sites default files, everything's in this web directory. The rest of this is like project files with a JSON that says which modules should be installed, etc. But what I want to point out now is that config directory was created, config sync, and it even adds an HT access so that, I don't know, it's just something that does, since it's putting it by default into the files directory, it's saying don't let anybody read this file or anything in here. Cool. So when we do a git status, we can show that we actually never committed our settings.php file after we changed that config directory, or our composer files after we required the admin toolbar. So that's what I do now. I'm just gonna commit those real quick and push that up. And now we're left with just the config directory, so we can git add config and commit that. And then push that up, and now our config is up in our remote repository, ready to be pulled to staging or production or whatever. This config installer profile should be in core, and hopefully makes it into core. It's by Alex Pott, who's a core committer, so maybe there's hope. But in the meantime, it's just an external profile, or it's a profile that you can install. You would put it into the web/profiles directory. Basically, this lets us install a new site from an existing set of configuration. So all that configuration we just exported, we can basically say install a site using this configuration instead of like installing it and then trying to either import the database if we get the site UUID or manually edit the UUID, which is very bad. And if you watch my DrupalCorn session, I showed you how to do it. Don't do it, because I learned about this. And there's some other things you can hack your way around it, but basically this is super, super clean, and this is what you should use. Oh, one thing to note though is that the official Drupal.org packages repository doesn't support profiles yet. It'll do modules and themes, but it won't do profiles, or I think there's one other thing it doesn't do. But basically that means I have to actually use Drush to download this and then commit it, because I have to do it so that other people can have it. Or so I can have it on stage
Is
production.
there a second best to that configuration installer when you're already using an existing profile like Lightning?
We'll get to that in just a second. I will answer that question. Okay, so I've just downloaded it, I'm adding it. I hate adding all this extra stuff now that I'm using Composer all the time, but it's what you do. Commit that and push it up. So now that config installer profile is in the repository. How am I doing on time? What time am I supposed to stop? Anybody know? Quarter till?
20 minutes.
Okay. I might have to start going a little faster. I'm going to blow through some of this stuff. I used a one-click install type site, so I had to kind of tweak some things to get rid of that. But basically the process is git clone your repository. And then I'm doing a thing because my server expects the site to be at public.html/dcornp. So I'm basically creating a symbolic link to from my source/web directory from dcornp, so that when it looks in that file, it actually goes directly to the web directory where Drupal is. And you can see that there, kind of stuff. Okay, so now we're going to run composer install -- no dev. No dev basically says install from the composer.lock file, but ignore anything in the required dev section. So that's where like things like bhat, PHP unit, even modules like devel or stage file proxy, things that you don't actually want on production, you put those in the required dev section, and then when you install in production, those files will never actually exist on the production server. So that goes, and then just completes with no problem. I'm going to set up my database. Again, this is kind of just Drupal stuff. Clear out my database and create a new one. Okay, so when that's done, I've just cloned the repo, And now I can go to /install.php and click next when I want to use English. And here on the select the install profile, we got your standard minimal. We also have the configuration installer profile that I put in. I'm going to use that. And it'll automatically detect, I think based on settings.php, but it'll automatically detect where the configuration is saved. And so I can just say, yep, that's what I want to use. Say continue, it'll do it. And here's where I was going to talk about Lightning. Even though I'm using the config install profile, it's saying the install profile is actually standard. So that's the one that we should say we're using. Does that make sense? So in my installation, it was done with the standard profile, but the config installer is kind of just an external thing that says use this and do it as though it's the standard profile. So it theoretically
I'll beta
should
it.
work.
I'm sure I'll beta it.
Yeah. Cool. And then that finishes and lets me create the site maintenance account. And then everything's broken. Yay. That's actually because I forgot to change something on local before I pushed up. My temporary directory is applications mamp temp PHP. So you just need to change the temp directory and then everything would work. And we'll fix that in just a second. But this is a great time to talk about overriding code in, or overriding your settings in code with settings.local.php. We've already created and enabled it, but I'm going to talk about 4 types of configuration. System configuration, and actually CSS is kind of one of those, but also theme debugging, which is a service, and then module configuration, so like things like Google Analytics API keys or things like that. You can actually override those things. So the settings.php has some examples like your site name, your system theme, user settings. Those have been there since Drupal 7 and totally useless. The relatively new example.settings.local.php that comes with Drupal 8 has some much more helpful and useful examples. These are the ones that I'm going to show you how to do right now. Moving the database credentials, or overriding database credentials, overriding caching, theme debugging, and service keys. The place you can find, okay, so this is great. You know, we can override this stuff. Awesome. How in the world do we know what to put into our settings.php file? Go look somewhere like this. Module name /config schema, and then the module name.schema.yaml. Here's a more concrete example. For system configuration, like the site name, that's what I'm going to do right here. In the web, core, modules, system, config schema, system schema.yaml file. So this one's a little complex. Other ones are actually much easier to find, but you're looking for that schema.yaml file. And in there, this is kind of what that looks like. I don't know if you remember or not, but what we used was site name system.site name, and you can see system.site is the top level. Did I do this with arrows? I did. Okay, system.site is the first key you're going to use, and then the name is the next key. The way you can read these is like mapping just tells you what's the next thing you can put under that. So system.site is first level, everything under mapping is the next level, so you could override the UUID or the name or the mail or the slogan, and I just want to use the name. So when I actually put that into a settings.php file, it's like config system.site name. Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions about that? Kind of flip back and forth. Site name, or system.site name, that's what gets put into the settings.php, system.site name, and then the value. So when I do that and reload, all of a sudden the dev at the end shows up. So on my dev site, it kind of tells me just a little indication. This is actually the dev site, not the live site. CSS aggregation is another big thing, especially if you're theming. Right now, if I inspect this and look at that CSS file, it's coming from site's default file CSS, some random CSS file. How in the world am I going to know where to change that? In the system.schema file, we can scroll down to the system.performance section. So system.performance, and then under mapping, we'll find CSS here. So system.performance, CSS, and under mapping, we'll see preprocess, which is the aggregate files. So, oh, there we go. I wanted to use arrows instead of my finger. System performance, CSS, preprocess. That's exactly what I put in here. System.performance, CSS, preprocess. And I'm setting that to false. So that's going to be overridden. Even if my configuration says true, which I want on production, locally I can set that to false, and all of a sudden it's false for local. And so then if I adjust CR and rebuild it, now we can see we're getting it from the core themes Bartik directory, directly. Oh, yeah, okay. And theme debugging is actually a service and not a config setting. So you can see up here in the example settings local, it gives me a setting containing the YAML Drupal development services. I'm just basically going to copy and paste that because that sites/development services YAML file already exists over here, sites, and then right above the one that's selected is development services YAML. So I'll just copy and paste that into my local file. And now in the services.yaml file, this one's even more difficult to read because there's lots of comments. But the idea is the same. We've got, I'm going to read it from my computer, if I can't even read that. Parameters, and then twig config, and it's set to false right now. Or twig, yeah, debugging is set to false. And if you don't know what debugging is, it's awesome. But I can just copy just those parts. I don't have to have all the comments. So now in my development services file, I'm saying twig config debug should be true. And when I rebuild that, now I have these nice green comments in my inspector window that say these are some templates you can use or other things that help debugging CSS and theming easy. Okay, and this is the one that I think most people don't even realize they can do. And I didn't know I could do it until I just tried it one day, and it worked. And I was like, hey, this is cool. You can override things like your Google Analytics settings and all kinds of junk. I'm just going to install Google Analytics real quick, and then we'll go into it. So this one's significantly easier to find. It's just in the modules contrib, Google Analytics, and then config schema directories. Contributed modules are usually much higher level than the core ones, and so this one's pretty easy to find. And in here, the web property ID is that actual like UA dash, your account, whatever. So this is going to be super simple. Google Analytics settings, account, and then put in the account in the. Again, I'm using my finger. So now down at the bottom, Google _Analytics.settings account equals. That's not actually my Google Analytics account. I don't think everybody has that, but. If I do that and view the source, you can see that it's using that for my site. And I'm not skipping any steps here. I didn't go like configure the Google Analytics settings through the UI or anything. I literally just put that into my settings.local.php file, and all of a sudden Google Analytics is working. So that's kind of cool, right? I think it's cool. You don't have to think it's cool. All right, let's commit stuff to Git, because we've got updated our development services to enable twig debugging and installed that. So installed Google Analytics.
Hey, Ron.
Yes.
Kind of back on your point about overriding those configuration settings file. We've had good success in Drupal 7 and 8 by, if you can get an environment variable that tells you what environment you're deployed in, you can interrogate that environment variable and then set your settings per environment in your settings.php file. And that is enormously helpful, because then in development, staging, UAT, and production, you can have separate settings for different things.
Both and documentation and platform.sh provides
Yes.
comprehensive
Yes.
examples of how to do that.
Yep. Very helpful.
And in that instance, you can put it all in settings.php because it'll.
Right. And then, but then if you have an individual developer that needs to override a setting specific to their own environment, then they can override it in the local settings.php and still override it even if you have defaults in there for local environment.
Right.
And then you can set up default local environments for new developers, and then they don't have to understand everything about how this works to get going, which is also very neat.
Cool. Okay, now we're going to kind of put it all together. This is what we're going to do. In short, we're going to install some stuff, change some configuration settings. We're actually going to create a view and see how that gets pushed up through configuration management. Assign some blocks to places, set up Google Analytics on production, and then override it on local. Export all that, commit it, push it, pull it, install it on production, and then see how we magically have a clone of our local site on production. So I'm going to install PathAuto once again. I like PathAuto. And I'm also going to install Devel. And this time I've used the --dev flag. That's how you make sure it goes into that required dev section if you're doing things through the command line like this. I think I even, yeah, so here we go, required devel gets put down there. That way it won't go on to production. I'm installing a theme. Don't use this theme. It's pretty bad, but it's one that's out there. So, yeah. And then enabling everything.
I developed that too.
Do what? Oh, you built it.
I lied.
You built the theme, yeah. No, this is, I noticed a bunch of themes all got pushed when Drupal 8 first came out by some like theme farm basically, and they were all half-baked, really, really crappy, but they all had links back to their site where you could pay them to develop a theme, and that's what this is, one of those. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and install that and set that as default. So here is our beautiful site, also with no content, so Angie was right. But anyway, and then we're going into the file system and setting the temp directory to just /temp, because that's something that actually makes more sense. And then since I have enabled devel generate, I went ahead and created a bunch of articles. And now I'm creating a view that's just going to have a block of articles that I can place in a sidebar. Straightforward. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm just clicking, doing site builder stuff in the interface. Placing that block as well as the who's new block in the left sidebar, so that new views block articles is there. And when I look at the site, this is still local. I'm doing everything locally. All the articles are there, the view is there, the who's new block is there. Everything's kind of fancy. So I'm going to save my my real authentic Google Analytics ID into the configuration here, and then locally I'm going to say my Google Analytics account is just empty quotes, and that'll basically cancel it out, so it won't work. And I'll show you that in a second. So with all of that configuration done, we can export, and DrushCEX is a lot more this time to do because we placed a bunch of blocks and enabled some themes and did all kinds of crazy stuff. So all of that gets exported, and this is Drush configuration management saying here's everything that has changed to make your site what it is right now. The core.extensions file at the very second from the bottom, that's actually the one that says which modules are enabled. So as long as it's enabled on production when you export it, it will be enabled on, or I'm sorry, if it's enabled on local when you export it, it will be enabled on production when you do a config import. So it will enable and disable things as long as it's saved into that core.extensions config file. So add that, commit it, push it, and then now up on the production server, pull in our thing. You'll notice that when I run Composer install no dev, we don't have devel because it's in that required dev section. And then when I do a CIM, it says, hey, import failed because devel doesn't exist. But I exported configuration for devel, and it's in that core.extensions file. So it's saying I'm trying to enable this module that doesn't exist. This is what happens if you don't disable a module before you export. So real quickly, I'm going to go back and uninstall it on local and export it, push that up, and pull that into production. So you notice the core.extensions and then the devel config files, those are what's changed. Basically, just got rid of them. And now when I do a config import, at the very bottom it says the configuration was imported successfully. Woohoo! I do want to take a quick second to mention Aquifer. It's actually a thing that we use at Four Kitchens. We started developing it internally. I don't know how many people outside of Four Kitchens use it, but it's pretty stinking awesome. One of the features it has is just a text file that is mods enabled local, and you can just put a bunch of things in there. So like we have devel in there, we have develkint in there, all that stuff. But anyways, when you do a config export, it'll automatically disable any modules that are in that list, then export, then re-enable the modules in that list, so you don't have to ever run into this issue. And same thing for import, it'll import configuration and then enable the modules in that list for that environment. So that kind of alleviates what we just ran into. And that's pretty awesome. Check out Aquifer, it's pretty stinking sweet. And then we can win. So we clear our cache, and now on production, all the modules are enabled, Google Analytics, admin toolbar, everything. The temp directory has been updated. I'm kind of just demonstrating that the admin toolbar is there. We have that on production now. and the articles list is even there. So the view got pushed up to production, and on production, my Google Analytics, because I saved it in configuration, is there. But on local, because I overrid it with those empty quotes, there's no mention of Google Analytics in the head at all. So that means we're not reporting to Google Analytics from local. That's a good thing. And that's it. So that's kind of how Composer, configuration management, all that stuff works together. I'm done. Questions? Comments? 3 minutes early even.
Spell that thing.
Oh yeah, Aquifer. Let me pull it
The
up.
German?
Yeah, aquifer.io is the website.
Aquifer.io, he says.
Stickers.
Do we have stickers? Come to our booth. We got stickers for Aquifer. I'm not pulling it up.
So like fun.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Any other questions? Or yeah.
I came in late, but I know this is going to be a problem anyway. So when someone makes changes on production, because you actually let your client make custom blocks or things like that.
Custom blocks are actually content and not config. So it's
Half and half.
Yeah, like the block declaration is config,
Yeah.
but the actual blocks itself.
Yeah.
At this point, we've pretty much just been creating them on live, and then we do database pulls and then config imports.
Yep.
That's kind of the workflow you should use. Configuration gets pushed up, databases get pulled down. So like using Aquifer, we have it's Aquifer run rebuild. Basically what it does is it check out a branch, so like if you're using Git flow, go to this new branch that has some configuration that somebody else exported and is saved in there. It pulls down the canonical database and then runs a config import of the config that's been exported to that branch. And so you've got kind of a marrying of the config that you want, or the content you want, and then importing your new configuration over top of that. So you see like, what's it gonna look like once they push this up?
Yeah, if you don't do that, it will load.
Yeah.
Settings away, which
So you don't have any like last minute checks, like say, oh, there's actually been some configuration change online. Because it's theoretically possible, but like I think we need to like pull out a couple, like create a couple new drush commands to make it easy.
Yeah. And right now, config export allows you to actually specify a list of modules to ignore. So you can ignore it to null, but then you run into kind of like this like situation like YAML form, for example, which has each individual YAML form is stored separately as config. So if you're saying staging requirements, messing around with YAML form, and you create a really complex form, and then you run config import, it will blow that away. So it's that kind of weird gray area.
Yeah.
Welcome to the frontier. We have cookies that are bleeding
Cool.
edge.
If there's nothing else, you guys can go a whole minute early. Woo! Oh yeah, lunch.
Thank you.
No problem.